Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Communications at American Bird Conservancy. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel afterwards. We'll be putting the links referenced in the chat, but in case you missed them or can't copy them down fast enough, please know that everything can be found in a follow-up email that we'll be sending to registrants and on our website. We'll try to answer as many of those questions that you put in the Q&A chat box as we go along, but also at the Q&A portion after the presentations. Automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the up arrow next to the CC icon, then click on Show Subtitles. You can drag them wherever you want on the screen to help your viewing process happen even better. Before we begin, I wanted to share some background information about American Bird Conservancy, shortened to ABC, which was founded in 1994 with the mission of protecting wild birds and their habitats across the Americas. We continue that work today following a conservation strategy outlined by the pyramid featured on the current slide. Our work strives to help keep common birds common and prevent the rare species from going extinct. And bird conservation works. Species and groups of birds have rebounded in the past decades, but it doesn't happen without people like you who care about birds. So thank you again for joining our webinar today. The phenomenon of fall migration is truly a marvel to experience. There are few things better than observing a kettle of broad-winged hawks in the Appalachian Mountains, or the seemingly endless sandhill crane flocks in Nebraska, or any of the other remarkable birds making these incredible journeys to their non-breeding grounds. Collectively, these birds will fly literally millions of miles across the entire Western Hemisphere in just the season alone. But where do these birds go? And how can we all ensure that there are conservation efforts at the scale needed to help? That's what today's webinar is all about. Here's who will be sharing more about this topic. Marci is joining us as ABC's Director of Migratory Bird Habitats in Latin America and the Caribbean, where she leads efforts to protect and restore priority landscapes that migratory birds depend on in their non-breeding grounds. Prior to joining ABC, Marci worked for the Nature Conservancy for 18 years, leading conservation and marketing programs across Latin America and the Caribbean. Marci has an international MBA from the University of South Carolina's Moore School of Business. Andrés Anchondo is ABC's Associate Director for Impact Investing in Latin America and the Caribbean, where he works with conservation partners and companies to implement best management practices for farming and ranching. Andrés uses his background in finance and agroforestry to demonstrate that done right, agriculture in Latin America and the Caribbean can provide bird habitat and help communities, companies, and investors turn a profit. Juan Fernando Letona is the founder and production manager of Hevea Costa Rica, a natural rubber producer that partners with ABC to restore bird habitat in the Caribbean Lowlands BirdScape. Juan has more than 14 years experience in the agricultural business, mainly bananas and pineapple. He is very passionate about his family and farming and is grateful to be able to work in a fulfilling and impactful field. We also have a surprise speaker this time, me. I'm usually the host of ABC webinars, but today I'll also be presenting. I'm a bird person through and through, and I'm excited to share more with you today. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm an ornithologist by training. I studied gray catbirds at Oberlin College and Great Lakes piping plovers for my master's degree at the University of Minnesota. I've worked a variety of bird jobs in the past, but love my current position at ABC because it lets me do one of my favorite things, share the joy of birds with others. So let me tell you a little bit more about fall migration to set the stage for the rest of the webinar. So migration is an incredible journey. It could be said it's the most amazing race, right? But let's dig into that a little bit more and learn what's up. So who's going on this trip? What birds actually migrate? So there's two main types of birds, right? There's migratory birds and resident birds. Resident birds are ones like northern cardinals that have a home range that they stay in year round. It's a pretty small area, relatively speaking, and they're always there. Migratory birds, however, have two distinct places that they stay throughout the year. One is usually their breeding grounds and one is their non-breeding grounds. And it's amazing that there's over 1,000 species covered just by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. About 350 species are long-distance migrants, neotropical migrants, meaning that they breed and nest in the US and Canada, and then spend that non-breeding season in the Latin American and South American areas. So why travel? Why go through this journey? Well, there's a few key things that happen during the year that are really important for birds to adapt to. And those include things like following where their food is. So especially for insectivore birds, right? So birds that eat bugs, they need to follow those bugs. There aren't many bugs in the tundra during the winter. And that also is why they need to be in warm areas. A lot of birds don't have the physiological adaptations to deal with cold weather, so they need to travel to where it's warmer. There's also things that shouldn't be taken for granted, such as habitat changes. No, leaves on the trees doesn't provide very much protection for birds that have predators. So going to areas that are safer is actually really important. So when we go on a road trip, you might have a suitcase or even a car packed with stuff, right? There's a lot to take, but birds, they only take themselves. So how do they do it? It's through these incredible adaptations that they have. So one of the things that they do is they molt. So you might have a suitcase full of jackets or new clothes, but birds, they actually change their feathers so that the feathers are the best that they can be to fly in, and then also provide what they want to wear for that season. So on the screen right now is a breeding indigo bunting, and that's the tucks of that bird species, right? But in the winter, they tend to be more brown so that they're camouflaged. So that's how molt works. They also have uropygial secretions, which are known as their preen oil. And this is the best multi-purpose gel out there, right? You might see on the shops, a body wash, a shampoo, and more. That's the uropygial secretion for birds. So it's their shampoo and conditioner. It makes their feathers really strong and durable. It's also like a raincoat because it's oil, so it helps them be more water resistant. And it actually has bug spray components. There's chemicals in this oil that help it have a resistance component to it. They also have physiological changes that allow them to make this journey. Usually birds put on a ton of extra fat that gives them fuel to do all of this exercise and exertion. In terms of how do they get there and what maps do they use, birds have a lot of incredible adaptations there. It's been shown that birds actually use everything from the stars to the sun position to the landscapes to magnetic fields. They also become more social during this time. So you could say, when you talk about wanting to be packed in someone else's suitcase for a trip, that's what birds do. That's why you tend to see flocks in the spring and the fall compared to, say, the breeding season when they're more territorial. So we're going on this trip, we're planning for it. When do we do it? We usually know about spring and fall being the season, but during the day actually has really cool components to it. So raptors tend to travel during the day, mostly because they don't have predators, but they also use things called thermals, which are the warm air that rise up off of the land to help propel them and save energy for their journey. This is in comparison to passerines or songbirds. So again, that indigo bunting we saw on the previous slide, they tend to travel at night. It's cooler, so it keeps them cooler while they're doing all of this exertion, but it also helps them have the cover of night for predators, and it allows them to use the stars for navigation. So in case you've ever been on a road trip and said, are we there yet? Birds might be thinking that too. The length of migration varies species to species, so it really depends, but you have both extremes of the spectrum. You have some very short distance migrants like blue grouse. They only travel a little bit, and it's actually altitudinal, again, to adjust to the weather of where they live. Then you have birds like Arctic terns, which hold the record for how far they fly. They actually will go around the globe in a year because they go from the South Pole to the North Pole and back again. You also have birds making really ridiculous journeys like blackpoll warblers, these super small passerines that'll actually go over the Atlantic Ocean, or even ruby-throated hummingbirds that cross the Gulf of Mexico without stopping. I know I definitely couldn't do that. So we know about point A and point B in terms of our journey, but what are the routes that we actually are going to take? How do you get there? So birds migrate via flyways, which are basically avian highways in the sky. Just like how we have interstates across the country, They have actual general patterns of where they fly through. And these tend to follow major geographic features, again, to help them know where to go. So as you'll see on the map, you have these north-south columns almost that really parallel coastlines, mountain ridges, rivers, and then they all funnel into where the birds end up going. So this incredible journey is not easy. There's definitely cost to it. And these all include things that, are either very predictable, like exhaustion, right? It's really, really tiring. Weather is another thing that is a huge concern for birds. If you get caught up in a storm and get blown off course or have other accidents happen. Habitat loss is a huge issue as well, because you want to make sure that there's safe places to stay no matter where you go. Then there's also a lot of the threats that ABC is actively working on. Things like collisions, windows, lights out at night that distract birds or disorient them, outdoor cats, pesticides, power lines. It's definitely the worst obstacle course when you're a migratory bird in action. Another thing though, just like us on a road trip, you can't go from point A to point B without stopping, especially if you say Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, right? You have to stop. Why? You need bathrooms, you need fuel, you need safe places to take a nap, you need food and gas. And that's what birds need too. They need these places called stopover sites. They're basically rest areas. And it's really important that we don't overlook them, because without them, birds won't be able to finish their journey. And birds also need those wintering locations too. It might seem obvious, again, that's our point B, that's the end goal right now with fall migration, but it's usually taken for granted. Unfortunately, there's a lot more research and conservation efforts that are needed in these areas, mostly because there's been so much emphasis in the breeding grounds in the US and Canada. Why? Well, when birds are breeding, they're more visual, they're colorful, they're vocal, they have these beautiful songs. But again, that's just a portion of the entire year. So research is actually discovering now that some species have sex-specific differences in what they like for the non-breeding grounds. So golden-winged warblers and bicknell's thrushes actually have male and female differences that are going to help inform conservation efforts moving forward and help us take action for birds even faster. And this is where ABC and our newly launched BirdsPlus program is coming into action, and it is very exciting to be launched. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marci to tell you more.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. I want to start off by sharing an experience that I had in October 2019. I was in Grenada and birding near my hotel one morning for about a half hour or so before heading to the airport to travel home. And my eyes caught sight of this little warbler eating ravenously in the trees above me. Then did not even notice I was there. And it turned out to be this blackpoll warbler, which Jordan mentioned, which was pretty amazing to see because the blackpoll warbler has the longest migration of any North American warbler. So each fall, the blackpolls migrate more than 2,000 miles across open water without stopping, sometimes flying more than 80 hours straight until they reach their wintering ground. So this little bird was taking a much needed stop to refuel after likely flying for days. And it really exemplified this epic journey of migratory birds and how important it is for us to conserve stopover and wintering sites for them in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next slide. And so what not everyone might realize is that for many migratory birds, the expanse of their breeding grounds in North America can be vastly larger than their wintering grounds, where they actually spend more than half the year. So for instance, the wood thrush has a pretty wide range when it's in the US and Canada during the summer. But as you can see on this map, its wintering grounds are much smaller. And same for the Wilson's warbler. This similarly has a broad breeding range across the Western United States and Canada, as well as Alaska. And yet it only occupies a part of Southern Mexico and a sliver of Central America during the winter. Next slide. So unfortunately, a lot of these habitats in the region are in their wintering grounds, they're significantly degraded. As you can see from this image from Honduras, In some countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, more than 60% of native forests have been lost. Also, 1 in 3 people in Latin America and the Caribbean live in poverty. So we have to look at solutions to deforestation that not only benefit birds, but also benefit people. So this is why ABC works in BirdScapes, which are priority areas identified by ABC and partners where sustainable land use leads to successful migratory bird habitat restoration and conservation, which can create win-win results for people and birds. ABC works in BirdScapes in both breeding grounds in North America and the wintering grounds in Latin America and the Caribbean to establish full annual life cycle conservation. So for instance, a bird like the wood thrush, which is here where I am in the Northern Virginia, Piedmont and Shenandoah Valley, and also winters in the Costa Rica Caribbean Lowlands, which Andrés and Juan will talk about more shortly. So you can see the full annual life cycle here. Next slide. So one thing that is really an opportunity for us with migratory birds is that they tend to be more generalists in their wintering grounds. In other words, a bird that may be very specialized during its breeding season in terms of needing certain kinds of trees for nesting and food for its young might be found in a multitude of habitats in the winter. So in Latin America, a birdscape might look something like this graphic here with a mosaic of bird-friendly land uses that these generalists can thrive in. For instance, by connecting protected areas like parks and reserves with sustainable ranching and shade coffee and cacao, we can create corridors for migratory birds and economically benefit local communities. And so this graphic here represents what one of these birdscapes looks like in Honduras. Next slide. And then, as you can see, ABC is supporting these sorts of working lands projects that benefit migratory birds across Latin America and the Caribbean. Land is limited, and there are a lot of people who need to earn their livelihoods. And as such, we're implementing different types of projects across the region. Next slide. So this has led ABC to launch its BirdsPlus program this year so that we can really scale up our efforts to restore bird habitat and working landscapes across Latin America and the Caribbean. The program is built around 3 pillars, the first of which is best management practices, in which we strive to create economic opportunities for local communities that will incentivize long-term nature conservation and promote science-backed habitat standards. The second pillar is the establishment of a BirdsPlus fund, as we see extraordinary potential to harness financial resources to scale up conservation. This fund will catalyze investments to create and sustain a portfolio of investable, scalable, and replicable habitat conservation and restoration projects. And finally, we're in the early stages of developing the BirdsPlus Index, which will be a tool to support and validate these investments by clearly measuring impacts on birds and biodiversity in a way that is quantifiable and verifiable. So birds can actually serve as convenient, efficient, and cost-effective indicators of overall biodiversity in a landscape. They return more quickly to landscapes under restoration and are relatively easy to survey through acoustic monitoring. So our goal is for this index to be a user-friendly tool for companies, investors, governments, and other nonprofit organizations to verify that the implementation of best management practices at project sites is providing desired ecological benefits. So now I will pass the baton to Andrés, who will dig more into these best management practices and some of our work in Costa Rica.
Great. Thank you so much, Marci. Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here with you. And I want to tell you the story about how we're promoting and implementing best management practices in different land uses in Latin America and the Caribbean. So with our partners, in-country partners, we work on different farms, different types of farms. And to reach out to those farmers there, we develop a series of infographics. And these infographics, they have a series of recommendations to help farmers do things that will help them in their farm, but will also benefit birds and other wildlife. We have developed the infographics for coffee and cacao farms, cattle ranching ranches, rice farms, people who are doing reforestation, cattle ranching in the tropics. But today, I want to tell you about the best management practices that we put together for rubber plantations. So you're probably thinking, why rubber? How's rubber plantations, those rubber trees that produce the rubber that's used to create different products like hoses, globes for medical purposes. So how can rubber farms help birds? So that's what I want to tell you today. And in 2016, ABC-funded research in Guatemala found that mixed native hardwoods and rubber plantations support the greatest combined abundance, species richness, and diversity of a large amount of migratory birds. This is that rubber plantations, when done right, they help migratory birds better sometimes than secondary forest, African oil palm plantations, teak plantations. So think about it. Rubber plantations, can they be good? Here on the right, you can see a photo of a mature rubber plantation in Guatemala. And if you look closely, maybe you will see that it's a plantation, but the canopy looks like a secondary forest to me when you're there. So when done right, rubber plantations can be good for people, can be good for businesses, it can be good for birds and other wildlife. So the whole process of establishing a rubber plantation from growing the seedlings that will be planted, from harvesting and taking care of trees, it's a whole process on itself, but can be good for birds. So how so? How are rubber plantations good for birds, and how can we make those rubber plantations more bird friendly? So think about it. When we establish a rubber plantation and mix native trees, we're adding forests, we're adding canopy to the landscape, and we're creating connectivity. We're connecting those forest patches in the landscape. So that way birds can move between those patches that are still on the landscape. So whenever possible, the recommendation is to integrate a mixed native tree plantation with your rubber plantation. This is, let's move away from monocultures of rubber and let's establish or let's plant more native trees. This is identifying which are those native trees in the region and mix them with the rubber plantation. That will offer more food options for birds, more connectivity. We also recommend that when establishing a rubber plantation, farmers should try intercropping. This is also known as agroforestry, when farmers combine different crops with the, in this case, the rubber trees and the other native trees. In this photo here on the right, you can see some rubber trees, and then we have banana palm trees, we have corn, we have other native trees growing. So that helps farmers have revenues in the short term, and then revenues in the long term when they're gonna be harvesting the rubber. But this also offers different food options for birds and diversifies their options there in the habitat. Here's another example. This is from our Conservation Coast BirdScape in Guatemala, where we're working with farmers to establish different crops under the shade of rubber plantations. This helps us diversify the understory in the plantations. A lot of birds, instead of using the canopy of the trees, they move on the ground at the ground level. So we want to make sure that those birds have food options in the understory as well. The other recommendation we make farmers, is to protect those old mature trees, those that are taller than 30 feet. We call those legacy trees. Those have a very important function in the landscape. They serve as islands that birds can use to move from a forest patch to another forest patch. It's really important that we protect those trees that are left when farmers cut the rest of the forest down. So let's protect those when restoring degraded lands. The last recommendation that I have here that I want to share with you, it's is when we are restoring a farm, when we're restoring a parcel, let's protect those standing trees. Like, let's try, the way we work with farmers is we ask them not to cut trees and protect existing forests. This is a property in Costa Rica, and Juan is going to be talking more about what Hevea Costa Rica is doing, but this is one of the properties that will be restored with rubber and mixed native trees plantations. And what they're going to be doing is protecting every tree in this property, which is really important. And as part of today's webinar, I want to tell you about our work in Costa Rica in our Caribbean Lowlands BirdScape. This is the area in the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. We are working in this BirdScape, creating private reserves, and doing other work on working landscapes. But today I want to tell you about our work with rubber plantations in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is really popular and well known for their conservation efforts, their pristine forests, their really beautiful beaches, and the volcanoes, right? We all know that Costa Rica can be a paradise, but it's less known that Costa Rica has more than 2 million acres of degraded lands. Lots of them are used as cattle pastures that offer very little to non-environmental services. Definitely, they don't offer any habitat for birds, in this case, migratory birds. So with the information from the research that ABC funded in 2016 that told us that rubber plantations can be good for migratory birds, and knowing that there's a lot of degraded lands that need to be restored, back in 2021, when I heard about this company, Hevea Costa Rica, that they have the mission of restoring degraded lands in Costa Rica, I wanted to know more. So last year, I convinced Marci that we should travel to Costa Rica and visit Hevea Costa Rica. So we traveled there last November, and we were impressed by the work that Hevea Costa Rica is doing, restoring the country's pasture lands and degraded lands. So here on the left, we have a photo of me looking for birds in a young rubber plantation. Here in the middle, we have Marci right in front of a legacy tree in an area that will be restored. And then here on the right, we have Marci on the front. We have Jeff on the back, who is one of our science advisors here at ABC. And then on the right, we have Juan Fernando Letona, that I will be introducing in a second, and Hevea CFO, Federico Zamora. So now I want to introduce you to Juan Fernando. He will be telling you about the great work that Hevea Costa Rica is doing and the great partnership that we are building between his company and ABC. So Juan, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. We are Hevea Costa Rica. I wanted to start by thanking ABC for having us here today and for being such a supportive partner in all our endeavors. In Hevea Costa Rica, we are developing the natural rubber agro industry in Costa Rica. We're trying to do this through a holistic approach that will bring opportunities to people in rural areas while we're trying to impact our surroundings through a production model that is based on reforestation and conservation. Some of our policies, for example, include working only on degraded lands, and now in our partnership with ABC, we're working on a more sustainable and biodiversity-friendly rubber plantation. As Andrés was saying, my name is Juan Fernando Letona, and even though my background was in business administration, I always had this calling to work in farms, and I've always felt more at ease when I'm working with people in the field. So when in the early 2000s, I got the opportunity to come to Costa Rica to manage an agricultural project, which was focused more on bananas and pineapple. And ever since, I have formed my family here and spent the past 20 years working in the province of Limón, which is the Costa Rica's Caribbean coast. Still, all this while, being originally from Guatemala, which is a natural rubber powerhouse in Latin America, I always questioned why didn't Costa Rica had any rubber plantations. Then right around 2014, there were some big changes going on in the pineapple sector, and I kind of by chance discovered the fact that Costa Rica was a net importer of natural rubber in an amount that made it desirable to have local production. And I also find out that the whole Western Hemisphere is dependent on rubber that is produced in Southeast Asia. So this is how we were born, how Hevea Costa Rica was born. Firstly, based on an opportunity to supply local and regional industries, but also because Costa Rica had a reforestation model that is based on timber. So we thought because rubber is a production model based on reforestation that doesn't require for the tree to be logged, it was good to have a different option from what Costa Rica had been doing for the past 20 years. The Hevea brasilensis tree, which is the tree that we use, is native to Latin America, which is good, let's say, in comparison to other species or varieties that are used a lot, like teak and melina. So this tree is currently planted for production of natural rubber in different countries across the region. But since we were starting from scratch, we have the opportunity to do better and go beyond what everybody else has been doing. Then as we started learning more about the rubber and developing our business model, we found that natural rubber also brings a whole lot more positive impacts, mainly to rural zones where the development index is very low. So we have used this knowledge and tried to use these impacts to build a more holistic venture where we are empowering small farmers. We are using rubber as a buffer for the protection of conservation areas or primary forests. Also, rubber is great at capturing carbon. And while we are doing this, we're trying to make it as friendly to biodiversity as the plantations can be. And in the end, we'll get another result, which will be that the local and regional industries will be able to lower their environmental footprint because we're going to be geographically closer to them. So they won't have to bring their raw material from far away. Hevea Costa Rica is is on track to become a player throughout the whole natural rubber value chain. We produce the saplings that will be used to establish the plantations. Then we participate in plantations as owners, but also as suppliers of material and technical support for all the independent farmers. And we're also working with a co-op that is going to give technical support and also finance the small landowners. Finally, we will buy all the produce from the farms, and we are going to give it the industrial grade that all these regional and local industries require. An important part of Hevea's business model since 2022 has been working hand in hand with ABC. This has given us wonderful options to make our plantations more bird and biodiversity friendly. We're going to be adding at least 10% of native species to our usual tree density. We're also protecting the legacy trees and primary forests that surround the plantations. We're also protecting all the riparian forests within the plantations, and we'll be doing much more in the social and environmental aspect. So in general, we greatly believe that this partnership has enhanced Hevea's business model and let us create a greater impact in Costa Rica's biodiversity and conservation and protection of natural forests and the ecosystem for birds and different biodiversity. Thank you very much, and we'll be waiting for questions.
And with that, thank you so much, Juan. With that, I just want to link back to Marci's presentation. She mentioned the BirdsPlus Index, and we're very happy to announce that we're going to be piloting the BirdsPlus Index in this rubber project in Costa Rica. Now, we're going to start with the field trials next year, January of next year. And the idea is to really test this innovative idea of using birds as indicators and offer this tool for companies like Juan Fernando's, offer this tool to investors that believe in companies like Juan Fernando's, Hevea Costa Rica, a tool to really measure the impact of their investments and their projects. So very excited for everything that's going on with BirdsPlus, with this rubber project, and how everything's connected to create and scale bird habitat conservation. So back to you, Jordan.
Thanks, everyone. Those were great presentations. So now we will go into the formal Q&A portion. So Juan, if you want to come back online, we have some questions that came in during registration, as well as some of the questions that have come in during the presentations. So while Juan is getting back, Andres, do you want to take the first one? Someone asked, what are some other projects, other than rubber, what are some other projects that ABC is involved with that support these bird-friendly products and conservation practices that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, we have a suite of projects. You probably saw the map that Marci showed in her presentation. We work from Mexico to Peru, and everything in between. We work with cacao farmers, coffee farmers, cattle ranchers. Not that long ago, Jordan, you probably remember in February, we announced that we worked last year with the Smithsonian to launch the very first bird-friendly cacao certification. So we have been working with farmers in the Dominican Republic, cacao farmers in Honduras, to really implement those recommendations to make their farms more bird friendly. So we have a lot of exciting things going on. I would invite everyone to visit our website, take a look at the different projects that we have.
Yeah, especially because Andres, we're talking about things that people can enjoy, like chocolate, right? So how can people access more information, both about what ABC is doing and then about those products specifically?
Yeah, so again, I would invite people to visit our website, read our blog about the bird-friendly chocolate. You will be able to find those chocolate companies, those chocolatiers producing really delicious chocolate with bird-friendly cacao. And of course, we have bird-friendly coffee. ABC support farmers. ABC, I'm really proud to say that ABC supported farmers in Venezuela that got the very first bird-friendly certification in the country. And they're doing very well. There are more and more farmers that want to join the projects because they benefit from it. And they know that by implementing those good practices, you're helping biodiversity, they're helping birds. So those, just a couple ideas.
Thanks, Andres. And Marci, talking about all of this, talking about fancy chocolate and coffee and everything else, takes money, right? So how are we helping to generate the funding for this program if we're trying to expand it?
That's a great question, Jordan. And I think most of our startup funding for this work to date has come from individuals and private foundations. However, we've also started to receive impact investment funding, in which investors who expect a financial return, say on a loan, as well as an environmental return, will put funds towards these projects. And some of this work, such as our cacao work in Honduras and a cardamom project in Guatemala, are already starting to pay back these loans. So it really helps the long-term sustainability. We're hoping to, further incentivize these funding streams through the BirdsPlus Fund that I mentioned. And ultimately, our goal is to have more impact investors and companies supporting these projects, especially as there's a lot of interest right now by consumers and also just by the private sector in general to more broadly promote environmental sustainability.
Thanks, Marci. And as Juan, you presented, one of those products is rubber. Can you share a little bit more about what specific products that rubber is being used in? That came in during a registration, but then someone live asked, can this rubber help us address the plastic issue and even replace plastic uses? So can you speak a little bit more about your rubber, Juan?
Well, before all the synthetic plastics and rubber came into existence, like around that was around the Second World War. That's when we started having plastics and synthetic rubber. Rubber used to be the only material used in certain types of products, and currently it's always a combination, a mix of synthetic with natural rubber. So rubber is still used in a lot of products. And what we have seen is that it's kind of making a comeback in certain products that are being manufactured just 100% natural rubber. This helps quite a bit because it makes them 100% biodegradable in comparison to something that already has a mix of synthetic. So I think we're going to see this natural rubber being used more. And actually, it does have more applications than synthetic rubbers and plastics. The thing is that there's more kinds of, I think the word in English is like polyesterenes that are synthetic. So there's a whole lot of those. Well, there's just one natural rubber. And so all of them have different applications. And usually, as I was saying, they are used in mixes, but we are seeing that some companies, like even tire companies, which is the main use or the biggest use for this rubbers, both natural and synthetic, are trying to they're tending to use a bigger percentage of natural and a smaller percentage of synthetic. And again, like I was saying, there's some products like toys or baby products like pacifiers, sandals, yoga mats, that you can now find them that are 100% natural rubber, and this way they are going to be 100% biodegradable. So yeah, we're kind of seeing a change. I couldn't say rubber is gonna change everything, but yeah, we're going to see more natural rubber in products in the future.
Thanks, Juan. Andres, I have to back up a little bit and be like, birds and rubber. Who would have ever thought that those two things would go together, right? So how did you help us get this project? Why go after rubber or even cardamom or some of the other products and agricultural crops that we're working on? How do you make those decisions and determine, are the birds deciding that for you? Are the crops? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, Guatemala is the biggest exporter of rubber in the Americas. So there are a lot of rubber plantations in Guatemala. We work in Guatemala. We have our conservation coast on Caribbean Guatemala. And back in 2016, ABC funded a group of researchers that wanted to understand what are the benefits of different land uses, different crops. So they analyzed secondary forests, timber plantations, African oil palm plantations, rubber plantations. And they found that overall, rubber plantations offer really good benefits for birds. Like I mentioned in my slide, you can compare a rubber plantation to a secondary forest. So when we're looking at companies trying to do a profit, because that's what companies do, but they also want to do the right thing for the environment, for biodiversity. And similar, the way I was introduced to Juan Fernando, to Hevea, their CFO reached out to me and say like, hey, we're a rubber company, but we want to do the things right. We want to do what's good for biodiversity. How can we work with ABC to make changes to the way we do business? And we know it's going to be good for the business. We know it's going to be for biodiversity. So we're always trying to find ways to create win-win scenarios. Win scenarios for birds, win scenarios for cacao farmers, win scenarios for coffee farmers, cattle ranchers. So there's a lot of things that we can do. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Andres. Marci, could you speak more about the birds though? How do you pick the priority birds that are in these areas? You know, why wood thrush over something else? How do we tell me about the birds?
Sure. So, you know, we work with a group called Partners in Flight that is a kind of a consortium of multiple organizations. And they look at, you know, like what are red list species and other, you know, being the top priorities, and then other at-risk species where, you know, the species populations may be in decline, and we want to make sure they don't get to that high at-risk category. So that helps us prioritize in terms of, you know, where are some of those birds going specifically. And then, as you know, I mentioned our BirdScapes. Another part of that is where they're actually enabling conditions as well in order for us to help restore habitat for these migratory species. So, you know, where they're strong partners, companies like Hevea, and you know, just those kind of enabling conditions where we feel like we can move the needle to bring habitat back for those migratory birds.
Thanks, Marci. And Andres, when you talk to farmers or you know, agricultural producers or, you know, folks that you want to partner with, how receptive are they to you when you bring up birds and saying that you want to partner because of helping birds?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And it's always easy to, it's not always easy to change the way people do things, right? They're used to do things a certain way. So when we work with our in-country partners, the way we introduce our recommendation is, look, there are really easy things, really easy practices, really easy things you can be doing in your farm that will benefit biodiversity. Well, that might not be enough. So there have to be some incentives. Farmers are business people, and their farms are their business. And the way we're working with BirdsPlus is we're working with groups of farmers and connecting them with buyers. Buyers are interested in organic cacao, organic coffee, bird-friendly cacao. They're willing to pay a prime for those crops that are being produced in a bird-friendly way. So, for example, in Honduras, we're working with a group of cacao farmers, and we help them connect with a buyer here in the US who's buying their cacao, paying a prime, because they know that what the farmers are doing requires an additional effort, but it's good for the environment. And yeah, we're facilitating those connections that at the end of the day is an incentive for farmers to create win-win conditions.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I may add a little bit about one of the things that we have learned and noticed here is that in this really low development index areas where we are working, you have to give especially the small farmers an incentive to conserve and an incentive especially to reforest the areas that over decades they have been degrading mainly for cattle ranching. So if you don't give them an economic incentive to conserve the land or to reforest the land, there's not going to be a way that they stop either the deforestation or much less reforesting the land that they already have as pasture. So it's very important that to have this any conservation effort has to be accompanied by something that will give people some economic benefit in order for them to really be open to changing what they have been doing for the past, I don't know, 50 or 60, 70 years in these areas.
Absolutely. I think that speaks to the livelihood and business component that Andres, you were talking about. So thanks for that contribution, Juan. So there's no I in conserve. So I know that this project is taking a lot of partners. Andres or Marci, could you share just a few of the other, indigenous tribes or NGOs or local, on the ground partners that we're working with? Because this is beyond ABC.
Yeah, I would be happy to give an example. The project I mentioned in Honduras is with the Mosquito indigenous communities in one of the most remote parts of the country, in the Mosquitia, which is the second largest wilderness in Central America. We also work with the Chachi indigenous people in Ecuador. They're based on, they live on northwest Ecuador, and they grow cacao, and we are helping them improve the way they do farming. So yes, we're working with indigenous communities, local communities, and we know that we need to be working hand in hand with them. We're a team in that regard.
Marci, are there any projects that you're most excited about, or that you even, would have been unexpected connections between birds and that product?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm excited about all our projects, but I think one thing that's been really interesting, Andres mentioned cardamom earlier, and it's really interesting. Guatemala is the #1 export of cardamom in the world. Who would have thought? And most of that cardamom is going to the Middle East, Europe, and so that's presented a really interesting opportunity for us, because cardamom can thrive under the shade of native trees. We were in Guatemala last year visiting the project, and sure enough, when we were visiting some of the cardamom trees in the shade, we saw several summer tanagers and like 4 or 5 different species of warblers, just for like a 10-minute stop on the road to look at the project. So it was really exciting to see that it's working even for lesser known crops like cardamom in Guatemala.
That's amazing. That must have been such a cool experience.
Indeed.
Juan, as our partner and on the ground with the rubber, have you noticed any changes or more birds in the areas that you work in since you've partnered with ABC?
Well, as you can see from the photos that Andres was showing, and the one in my background, Costa Rica didn't or hadn't had any rubber plantations in the last 60 years. There were rubber plantations like in the 40s and the 50s, and then for some reason people just abandoned them, and they had already been caught by loggers. So most of our plantations are in the early growth phase. But what we do have noticed is not only here, but I mean, we've traveled to obviously Guatemala and Colombia to visit different rubber plantations, and we have seen that it's quite friendly compared to, as I was saying, other varieties that are used mainly for timber, like the teak and the melina, which is what you see mostly in Latin America now. So rubber does help, and it's obviously much better than the pasture that we are taking over. So my quick question would be, rubber is quite friendly compared to other forestry models that you can see in the areas. As an example, and too bad we didn't have any photos of those, but for instance, in Brazil, where where there's huge plantations also. Parrots learn to eat the seeds. So when there's the seed season, you can see a lot of parrots in plantations. So we consider it to be quite friendly in that regard, and especially in comparison to other models.
That's very exciting. I wish we could all teleport to go see all the birds in those areas. Our time is quickly running out though, and I have one more question for all of our presenters before we go. We'll answer it in the order of the presentations, and that is, what is one thing you hope people take away from this webinar and share with a friend? So Marci, if you want to kick things off.
Sure. Well, I certainly, we've shared today that migration is such an epic journey for birds. And while it's important that here in North America, we do everything we can to support migrants' habitats that, in our backyards during the breeding season, it's also important to remember that they're spending more than half the year in their wintering grounds. And so whatever we can do to support their habitats in Latin America and the Caribbean, the greater their chances are for survival. So I think that would be the biggest takeaway that I would leave for folks.
Thanks, Marci. And Andrés?
Yeah, my takeaway and my recommendation is try to find for those bird-friendly products. There's definitely coffee, there's definitely cacao. And when there isn't a certification, try to go organic. You can really, I cannot stress how important it is to support those products that try to avoid the use of agrochemicals. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit ABC's website. We have a program on pesticides. And that's my recommendation. Look for bird-friendly, nature-friendly products.
Thanks, Andrés. And Juan?
I'm sorry?
What is one thing that you would like people to take away from this webinar and tell a friend?
Oh, I think it's important that people understand that the birds, this is the areas where they come for their wintering. So we need to do all these projects here on this side as well. So we guarantee not only that their ecosystems are protected and helped in the US or Canada, where most of the people in the seminar today are, but also in their wintering lands. So they have proper places to spend their winter.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Juan. So with that, we'll now end the webinar. Thank you everyone again for joining us. Thank you to our presenters for your wonderful presentations. None of us at ABC could do our work without you and your help to help us. So I hope you all enjoy fall migration and get to remember that these birds are making incredible journeys right over our heads. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending.